Growing up, the Wild Wild West was one of my favorite shows to watch after coming home from school. Yep, it really was the perfect way to decompress after a hard day of reading, writing, and a little bit of math, and I loved watching Robert Conrad and Ross Martin show me on a daily basis what it would have been like if James Bond had actually been a government spy in the wild and woolly West. It really was a super fun show. Like I said, my memories are not of its primetime run, but rather in the mid-70s when Salt Lake City got its first UHF TV station. Wild Wild West was one of the first shows to be featured on KSTU Channel 20, and I've got to say, I was hooked. Little did I know at the time about the heavy-handed way that the U.S. government had targeted this action-packed, and in the minds of many politicians, way too violent program. So the reason that the government got involved was because of the real-life violence that rocked the United States in 1968. During that year, both Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Senator Robert F. Kennedy were assassinated. The then President of the United States, Lyndon B. Johnson, commissioned a task force to look into the causes of violence and how it could be prevented in the future. One of the group's main findings was that television was having a dramatic impact on society as a whole, and people were becoming desensitized to violence because of what they were watching on the small screen. And according to Robert Conrad himself, one senator in particular was very vocal about the harmful effects of the Wild Wild West. Senator John Pastore of Rhode Island personally talked to Conrad about the show and told him that he believed it should be canceled. And although Conrad was quick to drop Pastore's name for decades to come, whenever he was asked about why a show that constantly won its time slot was given the axe, it really wasn't just Senator Pastore. There were numerous other committee members who were also advocating for CBS to get rid of the Wild Wild West. Ultimately, the show was canceled by CBS due to the tremendous pressure that they were feeling to eliminate programs that were deemed too violent. Ironically, just a couple of years earlier, Senator Robert Byrd had pressured CBS to do the opposite when they were considering canceling his favorite program. Another Western, in fact. Perhaps that's why Gunsmoke was spared from the mass cancellation of violent television programming in 1969. Hard to say, but the TV program starring James Arness would run on CBS for another 6 years. It was ultimately canceled in 1975. Interestingly, CBS almost immediately regretted canceling the Wild Wild West. None of their new shows that they put in that time slot performed as well, and less than a year later, they began playing reruns of the Wild Wild West as a summertime fill-in for the Carol Burnett Show. It just goes to show you can't keep a good program down, even if you are the U.S. government. And about a decade later, there were a couple of other opportunities for Conrad and Martin to return to the roles that they were most famous for. I loved both the Wild Wild West Revisited as well as more Wild Wild West. And while Paul Williams was no Michael Dunn, it was still fun to see James West and Artemis Gordon back on the screen again.
Wednesday, after 10 years in retirement, can Jim West and Artemis Gordon make a comeback? Find out on the Wild Wild West Revisited, Wednesday at 8, 7 Central and Mountain.
And many, many years later, West and Gordon would finally make their big screen theatrical debut. But really, I think the less said about that one, the better. Let's end here with Jim and Artie's greatest adversary, the nefarious Dr. Miguelito Loveless, as played by the wonderful actor Michael Dunn. Such great, great memories. Okay, now it's your turn. Please share your memories in the comments section, and if you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. Maybe even share it on Facebook or Twitter. And what the heck, why not consider subscribing to my channel? I talk about music, movies, and television, mostly from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. You know, the good stuff. But most importantly, and as always, thank you so much for watching.